Welcome to Session 5 of Mainstream Apologetics. We're glad that you decided to join us for this session. During the next two sessions, we will explore the topic, the purposes of God. We will answer the critical question, how do I know that life was created for a divine purpose? The big idea for our next two sessions is the design and creation of the universe and the formation of life on Earth came about by the intervention of a transcendent divine designer. During this session, we'll provide a context for this big idea, and then during our next session, we will actually defend this big idea. So what do we mean by purpose, and why is purpose important to our discussion of apologetics? R.C. Sproul, in his book, Now That's a Good Question, describes the purpose of life in terms of a vexing dichotomy. Are we the product of a purposive act of divine intelligence, or are we the product of a cosmic accident? How we answer this question greatly influences how we approach life. At the heart of this question is not just whether we believe in a creator God, but whether life itself has any value. On one hand, if a creator God initiated the creation of life, then life has purpose, and it has intrinsic dignity and worth. Genesis 1:26 says, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us." In this verse, we are told that God initiated the formation of human life. We are created in His image, therefore we are endowed with purpose. Therefore our dignity and worth is derived from God Himself. On the other hand, if life just evolved without the intervention of God, then human life is devoid of intrinsic dignity and worth and purpose. In 2003, the American Humanist Association published an update to their humanist worldview entitled Humanist Manifesto 3. Their worldview espouses that humans can be good without God. One of their key affirmations denies that human value is derived from a creator God. Rather, they argue that human value is, quote, derived from human need, concern, and interest as tested by experience, end quote. Quite frankly, we have no clue what this affirmation means. It seems their definition of human value depends on one's subjective interpretation of another's needs, and other factors such as personal concerns, interests, perspectives, and so on. We at Mainstream Apologetics regard this definition of human value as pure nonsense. We believe R.C. Sproul summed up the humanist position when he said, "If I came from nothing and go to nothing, then between these two poles of nothingness, I am nothing." Clearly, if man is a cosmic accident, then he is merely a random composition of chemicals, nothing more. Before we present evidence for purpose in Session 6, we want to provide you with a context. What we mean by context is a perspective or background with which to understand the evidence. This context includes Darwin's own doubt concerning his theory of evolution, the field of teleology, which is the study of purpose and design, and the unfathomable complexities of biological life. First, let's discuss Darwin's own doubt with his theory of evolution. Darwin's doubt originates from the lack of empirical evidence to substantiate his suppositions. The reason we raise this concern is that the formulation of Darwin's theory of evolution preceded the entire field of microbiology. Darwin's theory wasn't vetted by the advances in science, paleontology, geology, and so on. It was half-baked in terms of scientific rigor and method. Essentially, it was declared fact before it was proven as fact. This speaks of the desperation of the secular community to advance a theory of creation devoid of God. At the heart of this discussion is the plausibility of Darwinian evolution. What is pernicious is that evolution seems logical and reasonable at first glance. According to a recent Pew survey, evolution is regarded as fact by 81% of adults in the US. People reason that if microevolution is true, then macroevolution is true by extension. First, we begin with Darwin's own doubt about his nascent theory of evolution. The first concern regards the lack of fossil records. Quoting from Origin of Species, Darwin writes, "Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and thus perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be used against my theory." What Darwin is acknowledging is that the geological record doesn't record any clear lineage of finely graduated mutations. This is a major concern because Darwin's entire theory is predicated on this assumption. The gaps in the fossil record of intermediate life forms is a major problem for Darwin's theory. Another quote from Origin of Species, Darwin writes, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organism existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." What Darwin is saying is that if stepwise refinement of species cannot be validated by the geological record, his theory will absolutely break down. What we need to understand about Darwin's theory is that it's predicated on the assumption that the fossil record will eventually reveal intermediates to prove his theory of stepwise refinement correct. Let's be clear, Darwin took a simplistic view of organisms. All he had at his disposal was a microscope. His theory was published before the dawn of microbiology. Because of this, Darwin viewed the inner workings of an organism as a black box. Darwin assumed that biological research that would follow would eventually produce simple answers that would validate his theories. The bottom line is that his theories are based on simple observation of the macroscopic world and conjecture. Darwin's theory really only speaks about microevolution, which is essentially an organism's ability to adapt to the changing environment through gradual mutations. His theory really doesn't account for macroevolution, that is, how organisms were created in the first place. So we say Darwin's theory of evolution only addresses the survival of the species, but does not adequately address the arrival of the species. The second topic we want to discuss is teleology. The term teleology is derived from the Greek words telos, which means end, and logos, which means reason, or end reason. Essentially, teleology is the philosophical inquiry of purpose, intent, and function. Thomas Aquinas, one of the earliest Christian apologists of the 13th century, framed the teleological argument as a syllogism. He argued, wherever complex design exists, there must have been a designer. And the universe and life are marked by complex design. Therefore, the universe and life are the work of an intelligent designer. Aquinas' argument makes use of something known as abductive reasoning, or what I call reasoning in reverse. In fact, teleology is largely based on abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning is a bit different than inductive and deductive reasoning. The prefix ab implies away, or take away, or draw a conclusion from the information provided. Abductive reasoning argues that if something has occurred, the effect, then the precipitating event, the cause, must have occurred as well. With abductive reasoning, we make inferences about past causes from present effects. In the process, we postulate the most likely cause from an array of possible causes. During this process, we acknowledge that random chance is a likely cause. We consider all other likely causes until we determine which is the most likely cause. When we apply abductive reasoning to creation, we identify the following possible causes for design. Design evolved by a process of convergent evolution, or design is self-existent, where it never had an origin, or design is self-created, where it created itself from nothing, or design is merely an illusion, which has been espoused by Richard Dawkins, or finally, design originated in the mind of a divine designer. Therefore, design itself is transcendent and pre-existent. We at Mainstream Apologetics believe the most likely cause is that design originated in the mind of a divine designer. Our position is summarized in the following abductive statement. Because we observe design, the effect, we assume there must have been a designer, the cause. The argument is that simple. This line of abductive reasoning is illustrated with the example of Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. The question is, did Mount Rushmore come about by chance or by design? Are the carvings the product of a weather event or the product of a skilled artisan? We argue that no one would look at Mount Rushmore and think that it came about by chance. We reason that the busts of the 4 presidents of Mount Rushmore is more likely the product of a skilled artisan who knew what each president looked like versus a weather event that was devoid of both skill and foreknowledge. We know the skills required to design the busts was not acquired during the construction process, and the foreknowledge of what the presidents looked like was known in advance of construction. When we observe design and creation, we are forced to draw the very same conclusion. The universe and life came about by a divine designer. Basically, everything in creation exhibits intelligent design. Design is exhibited in the following ways. The first, universality of the cosmological constants and physical laws. These are measurable, constant, and interdependent. Second, the Fibonacci sequence, also known as the Golden Rule, is exhibited throughout creation from the proportion of the human face to the number and arrangement of flower petals to the layout of planetary objects in space. Third is symmetry, duplication, and other notable design patterns. Bilateral symmetry, such as the mirror image of the human body, and the radial symmetry of a starfish, is the property of organization. Duplication of human body organs is the property of composition. We observe these patterns throughout creation. Fourth, highly interdependent systems. This is best illustrated with the human body. For example, the circulatory system consisting of the heart, arteries, and veins depends on the nervous system to electrically stimulate the heart muscles to pump blood, and on the respiratory system to provide oxygen to heart muscles, and so on. If any one of these systems fails, the entire circulatory system fails as well. And then finally, creation is marked by general consistency and orderliness despite the many underlying complexities. As you can see, there is strong evidence for design. We end this topic of teleology with a brief overview of the anthropic principle, advanced by secular astronomer Brandon Carter in 1973. Anthropic is the Greek word for human or human being. So the anthropic principle focuses on the purposes of human existence. Carter suggests that because the physical and cosmological parameters observed on Earth are constrained and interrelated to support carbon-based life, then Earth was intentionally designed and expressly purposed to support human life. As you can see, the anthropic principle is stated abductively. We observe design of the requisite conditions to support human life. Therefore, creation was designed with human life in mind. The implication of the anthropic principle is that the conditions to support human life must have existed in advance of human life. In other words, these anthropic conditions could not have evolved simultaneously with human life. We conclude this session with our last topic, the unfathomable complexity of creation. In the past 150 plus years, the field of microbiology has exploded with information. Research in biology has made tremendous strides forward in the field of genetics. Most notable was the discovery of the double helix structure of DNA by James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953. Soon after, DNA sequencing tools became available, enabling geneticists to decode the human genome. In 1990, an international committee known as the Human Genome Project was formed to sequence the human genome. It wasn't until 2003 that the committee was able to accurately specify the complete human genome, consisting of 3.2 billion nucleotide pairs. Later in 2012, Cass Kramer and a group of scientists from the University of Lancaster, UK, decided to print out the human genome. Pictured on this slide is a 130-volume set of the human genome color-coded by chromosome. Each 8.5 by 11 page was printed on both sides in 4-point font with approximately 43,000 characters per page. While the size of the human genome may seem exceptionally long, it turns out that there's an organism known as the amoeba dubia that has a genome that is 200 times longer than the human genome. That's 26,000 volumes versus 130 volumes for the human genome. We have to keep in mind that DNA and genome sequencing is only the beginning. In the last 20 years, there have been several discoveries that have brought to light additional complexities. We highlight two of these discoveries. The first is epigenetics, which is perhaps the most significant of these discoveries. Epigenetics literally means beyond genetics. As the name implies, epigenetics is information that is not contained in DNA. It represents additional biological information that governs the production of cells in the development of the body plan. The main function of these epigenetic proteins is to contextually decode DNA during the production of the different cells in the body plan and arrange and assemble the new cells into different body parts. Epigenetics is the focus of the field of embryology. The second key discovery is the process by which DNA repairs itself. In 2015, the Nobel Prize was awarded to three chemists, Thomas Lindahl, Paul Modrich, and Aziz Sankar, for their discovery of molecular systems within the cell that are responsible for monitoring and repairing damaged DNA. These discoveries underscore the extraordinary complexities of life that continue to confound scientists. So we ask, what is the likelihood of the human genome being the product of chance? In a recent 2019 roundtable discussion, mathematician David Berlinski painted a daunting picture of the state of scientific inquiry, and I quote, "Every time we look, there's an additional layer of complexity that emerges. Emergence of this complexity is hard to explain because we are continually behind the curve every time we look. The goal of constructing a plausible evolutionary theory is receding, becoming more and more difficult." What Berlinski is saying is that while we think we're getting closer to a full understanding, we are actually falling further behind. Just when we think we've discovered something, the discovery raises more questions than it answers. A good analogy are the waves of a seashore. As a wave comes within reach, it immediately goes out and becomes unreachable. These complexities pose a formidable challenge to neo-Darwinists as they attempt to postulate credible theories to explain the intricacies of life. The more we discover, the more the evidence challenges the orthodox Darwinian position. In advance of next week's session, we submit the following big idea. The design and creation of the universe and the formation of life on Earth came about by the intervention of a transcendent divine designer. What we mean by transcendent is that design knowledge was pre-existent. A design always precedes a construction project, so design pre-existed the act of creation. God had in mind the design of the universe and life before the foundation of the universe. We will develop and defend this big idea in our next session. Once again, we want to provide you with an opportunity for reflection. If you're in a group, please discuss the following questions. Otherwise, please answer these questions individually. Again, we draw your attention to the bonus question at the end. We encourage you to review your answer from last week and build on it with the teaching from this week's session.